good evening, everybody, and it's wonderful to have you back here at week 2 of the Better Brain Book Club. Hopefully you've all received your books by now, which is exciting. I'm just looking for a tab that I have obviously closed, which is rather unhelpful. There we go. And how fabulous was the interview with Bonnie Kaplan last week, right? She's got so much to share, left me with lots to consider, and hopefully you had a similar experience with that, and just how generous she was with her time. Little bit of admin, I think, tonight before we get started. You have your special guest tonight is me. We have no special guests, so I would really love it if we can participate, join the conversation. Feel free to unmute yourself and speak, or type questions and comments in the chat, and we can read them out and have that that interaction. Would be fabulous. So I think I know most of you on this call, but for those of you that don't know me and are joining, either watching the recording or joining us live for the first time, I'm Bronwyn Hudson, founder at Fuel Your Wellbeing. I'm a registered clinical nutritionist with a Master's of Science in Personalised Nutrition, and I live up near Orewa Beach, north of Auckland. I have 4 kids that keep me busy. I often joke 5 kids, but the big kid is looking after the other 4 at the moment, so he's proving his worth as a grown up now. And I'm just really passionate about connecting the dots between food and mood and the way that nutrition can impact on our mental well-being. I think so much of the nutrition field focuses on how nutrition helps our physical health and how we look, but very little on this really valuable role of nutrition and mental well-being. So when I'm such a fangirl of Julia Rucklidge and her research, and when Julia and Bonnie published this book, The Better Brain, I thought, oh, this is just fabulous. So I wanted to share this information with as many people as possible, and that's why this lockdown book club popped up. So this week I had asked that if possible, and I realized that some people were still waiting on slow deliveries, if we could read the 3 chapters that make up part 1. So the missing key for mental health, food for thought, the nutrients that your brain needs, and then chapter 3 was called Not Your Grandmother's Peach, which is looking at factors that have led to decreased nutrient intake. So quite a lot of information in these 3 chapters, huh? I do say don't worry if you didn't take it all in, or even if you didn't understand it all. I feel with any type of learning or reading that we do, if we just take one thing from it, it's still worth it. I often think that when I attend a webinar or a course or some form of professional development, if I can just take one thing, then it's still worth my time. And I would share that with you for tonight as well. So shall we rock into chapter 1? Which bring up here. So chapter 1 is looking at the role of nutrition as a missing key for mental health. Draws on the cutting edge research, but also ancient wisdom. I loved the reference in there to, sort of 100 years ago as well. And really empowering, I think, chapter 1, helping us understand some of the modifiable risk factors for mental health and mental illness and languishing mental health. But when we understand that some of those are modifiable and that diet can play a big role in that, that's quite important. So I'm just going to flick open my chapter 1. Has anyone drawn on their book yet? I know there was some excited to get their highlighters out this week when I suggested that you could actually draw on this. My kids thought it was just horrendous that I was writing on a book. So first thing I noticed here, chapter 1, didn't want to dwell on all the bad news. I know that's how it kind of starts. It says first the bad news, the tsunami of mental disorders has hit. I think we are all very familiar with the statistics around mental illness, mental distress, mental well-being, how many of us are languishing, especially during times like this. We understand that the stats aren't great. We understand that they're getting worse, and I think it's reasonably obvious to most people that the mainstream toolbox of medications and talking therapies, which are both really useful tools in the toolbox, are obviously not the total answer, or we would be seeing much more different results here. So, I mean, I'm a huge advocate for accessing professional mental health support. People that have followed me for a while or seen me speak at other things will know that that's a huge thing that I advocate for. And I don't think that nutrients are going to undo the impact of trauma, for example, or give us tools in our toolkit to help us communicate better in challenging relationships, etc. And those things are all play a role on how we feel as well. So I think that's really important. And we will come back to that, I think, in the next chapter. Somewhere in this section anyway, there's a bit where they talk about medication, and there's a few things I'd like to say at that point as well. But you know, and I think that's what it says here. We still, page 23, we still don't know what precisely causes mental illness. Science has uncovered some clues, like our genetics, our childhood environment, exposure to trauma, poverty, social deprivation, and the effects of toxins on neural development. So there's a few of the risk factors and clues there, but the book goes on to tell us more about that. I found it interesting that Julia's TED talk mentioned on page 25 was in 2014. So that's 7 years ago. You can imagine the research has developed hugely even since then. Has anyone seen Julia's TED talk? Yeah, some nods and some shakes, so a real mixture from the people that are watching live. I'll share a link to the Julia's. I'll just write notes now while I remember. It's a TEDx talk that she did in Canterbury, 2014, and it's well worth watching. I like, you know, the whole model of TED and TEDx talks, nice and short and sharp and to the point, and you can get a lot of information across in a very short time. It's worth watching. So when I'm speaking about Julia, obviously I'm talking about Julia Rucklidge, PhD doctor based at University of Canterbury, who co-authors this book and is joining us live next week for our session. So I feel really privileged that both authors have given their time for our book club, with Bonnie being recorded for last week and Julia joining us live next week. So if you want to get any questions through to Julia, I will. Oh, and sorry, someone's just mentioned in there too about haven't seen Julia's TED talk, but doing her online course. I think that's into about week 5 at the moment, isn't it? But it runs, and that's through edX. Yeah, so I'll link to that as well. So that's a free course that anybody can sign up to do, runs over a number of weeks, very, very user-friendly and easier, designed for the general public, but even as a lot of practitioners from various fields find it very interesting to do as well. So excellent. A couple of other people saying that they've done that there as well. And yeah, really important point in the comments also, I read about potential plastics and BPA effects on neural development. Scary. Same for water bottles. It is scary, and until not all that long ago it was in baby bottles, which is incredibly scary. I know back, so I had Caleb, he's coming up 15, and someone gave us a whole lot of bottles to use for him, and I don't want to use them. It was right around about that time that it was just becoming a little bit more knowledgeable. I'd bought glass bottles, but didn't end up really using them either. I fed him mostly myself, but it still took a number of years before the BPA was actually banned from babies' bottles, which is quite scary, and very much the impact of that. Yeah, and the good old talcum powder. No, not so good old talcum powder. All of those bits and pieces, I know, funny. All the well-meaning, all the baby packs that you give so much to give away at the end. Just so many of products that are designed as well. You know, it's something I do when I work with people for pre-pregnancy course that I run, even just educating prospective parents on what they can be changing in terms of that toxin exposure at that point, so that we can minimize right through, can have a big impact on how much exposure people are getting. There's a really interesting, in case it actually gets into, it's this chapter where we get into a little bit about the medication. If I look at page 26, and baby wipes, and yeah, absolutely, absolutely, Annette. So page 26, this is when Julie was collaborating on a study, and it says about 200 people were in the study. 70.8% of them fell above the high psychological distress range, with half of these people falling in the very high distress range, which is indicative of severe mental disorder. But most of them, 84.5%, so a big number, were already taking antidepressants. And then they were still showing up in this range in terms of their psychological distress range. So that's the typical conventional treatment. So the medications clearly were not resolving their mood problems. I read this out to my husband when I was rereading this section in the weekend, and his response was, that's all we think we can do. I know when he first went to see the GP when he was struggling with his depression many years ago, and that was all that was on offer, and there was never any talk of there being other things. So it's natural that that's the way that we go. And I underlined the line at the end of that paragraph, you know, when we seem to accept that partial or minimal recovery is adequate, and they say that it isn't. And I really related to that. In fact, I've written same with pain. I've had a very similar experience, and I know many people have, with pain medications, which are also often, they're often the similar medications that are used for psychological disorders as well, but at different doses, and come with a raft of side effects that have not been pleasant to work through. And for very minimal impact. And I think pain specialists were getting frustrated with me when I kept saying, I don't want to, I'm not going to keep taking that, because I wasn't getting anywhere near enough benefit, and the side effects aren't great. What else can I do? So it's great just to see a comment there. Thank you, that my doctor did promote exercise also at helping depression, and that's great to hear. And obviously there's a range of what doctors will recommend, and there is more and more there. But, you know, I don't even think that, you know, talking therapies was actually recommended either. It was very much this concept of just take a pill, which is a little bit about what Bonnie talked about last week, this whole idea of, and just written in the comments as well, people are after a magic pill, and people need to put in the work while taking medication, not just rely on the medication. I 100% agree. I have seen in my work, I believe that oftentimes medication plays a very important role in getting people to the space where they can do the work, where they're more open to engaging with a psychologist, or they're more open to being able to bring lifestyle measures into play, changing their diets, learning to cook, exercising, that actually if we're looking at doing all of those things under the cover of medication as a starting point, then that makes a lot more sense than just expecting that we can take a medication and that's going to do the whole thing. So I guess you're picking up very much here, I am far from anti-medication, but I think it's about understanding the limitations that for some people, that for a lot of people, the medication can have, but that it can provide a really great space where we can lean into the other things that are going to help as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Bronwyn, good point there, Ryan, about medication. I think, I've also been very much anti-medication for a very long period of time, and and I think both my folks passed away, and just seeing how they suffered with stroke, with depression, with just a lot of illnesses, and how the only route they went for was medication. And I just it became a big eye opener for me to say, what, because I'm in that bloodline, I need to be very cautious about just relying on medication. So I think, just some of those comments around exercise has been really a big focus on me. Spiritual and well-being has been really a big focus. And I think for some of you guys, maybe they don't know, I recently immigrated from South Africa last year, January, smack bang just before lockdown. And I hit a massive, rough patch, just, obviously settling in here, and my family being stuck in SA for, basically a period of 7 months, when it was only supposed to be 3 months, of separating from them. Anyway, long story short, I took quite a rough time, just dealing with a lot of anxiety and finding myself being constantly in a dip of being depressed, obviously trying to settle in the Kiwi world. But I've just realized that the spiritual well-being, when the exercise and the connection, it's absolutely crucial. And I think this gem that Bronwyn is trying to highlight around just the brain and the nutrition, the gut side of it, I think it's a dream come true, that I've been wanting to get this information. So yep, just my little 2 cents of testimony there.
Yeah, that's fabulous, Tabo. Thank you. And there's a little message in there, comments from Rebecca there saying welcome to New Zealand. Sorry, yes, Nina.
Hi. Yeah, welcome, Tabo. I just wanted to say one thing though, with the TED talk, and that I listened to it a long time ago, maybe a year ago, not that long, but and also with the start of the book, I haven't made it far through. It comes across quite anti-medication, which I imagine when you've been beaten down for years and years and years by mainstream psychologists and psychiatrists and everyone rubbishing your studies, which are clearly amazing. It must be very easy to become a bit more negative. I don't know if that's how they are, but I remember feeling from the talk, wow, there's some exciting things, but they're quite negative towards, it comes across that they're really quite negative towards the medication. But I haven't read all the book, I only just got it. But what I would say is my personal, when I had, I've been lucky, I only haven't had terrible things like lots of people do with mental health, but I had anxiety for years with a terrible job and things when I was in the UK. And my doctor just said that I was just stressed. So I just needed to, carry on, because it was England. He didn't give me a magic pill. But, and so I did reflexology, and I did homeopathy, and I did massage, and I did exercise. And actually I really just needed to change jobs and change country and go home. And I managed to eventually cut out coffee, I did all sorts of little things, but I gradually got better. But when I had a baby, I got postnatal anxiety, and I got put on medication, and it was life-changing. So I was one of the lucky ones that it worked. And I just thought, I wish someone, for that year that I was going through stress, where I felt like I had a tumour in my chest. I went to the doctor to check if there was a tumour, even though I knew there wasn't. I wish he'd offered me some medication. I did all the natural things. I tried, and they would have helped, but but the medication for me really helped. But I also know that there's so much more to it, and we can be better, and I love what we're doing. I think it's so exciting, because like Julia and Bronwyn and everyone here, the authors, it's scary, the amount of mental unwellness. And as she says in her book, you know, we had various things I've read too, but, you know, we had the Great Depression, and, you know, our forefathers or whatever, in the last century, they had the Holocaust, they had the Great Depression, they've had they've had terrible things they've had to live through. And a lot of it probably was that they didn't have their mental illness, you know, it wasn't labeled, or it was just, you just had to deal with it, I guess, or people didn't make it. But it's scary how it's becoming more and more, and especially in children. You know, that's what really worries me. And that's why I'm so keen about nutrition, because there's so many people you think, I just want to help you, and if I could, you know, if I can learn something, I can pass that on, you know. So yeah, anyway,
absolutely. And you've got a huge heart, I can hear that, for helping. And I think a big thing of what you mentioned there, Tabo touched on as well, about the importance of connection. And for those that are in the Facebook group and have seen the little snippets of the talk that Mel Morris, who's on the call tonight, and I did as part of I was going to say Zero Education Week. It wasn't Education Week. It was, what was it? Zero on Air. It was one of those things. And we were talking about resilience. And a really big part of that, when you look at resilience research, is about being connected. And it's the right, you know, having the right types of connections as well. It's really, it's a big part of it. And the other thing that Tabo mentioned was that spiritual dimension as well, and that looks different for everybody as to whether that is you know, connecting in an organized religion or a faith or whatever. But spirituality can look like so many things. We know there's a real need for spiritual dimension in terms of health overall anyway. All of my work follows that sort of bio-psychosocial spiritual model. And it's all interlinked. So I think there's some really important things to remember there. And when I think about the way that food comes into that, you know, how much food happens, you know, how much of the ways that we connect is around food and sharing meals and eating. And when we often, you know, if you meet someone, it's inviting them for a meal. It's, you know, those things. I remember first meeting Tabo and not being able to invite you for a meal because it was lockdown very, very quickly, but thankfully you got to do that lockdown with a lovely family last year. So yeah, all very relevant. And of course there will be things that even, you know, for me, as I read through this, these things I don't necessarily agree with, and they have the same views as the authors. And I would encourage all of you to question always what you read, right, and to see what fits well with you. So Nina, you know, I agree there's aspects of potentially sounding more anti-medication. I think that's why I wanted to really share my view there, that I believe it really does play an important role. And I think they did say in here somewhere, you know, that, page 34, some people benefit from psychiatric medications over time with no side effects. These people are a minority, but for them, it's a really good option. So you don't know that unless you try. Like I said, for others, it could be that the short-term benefits that come, they may not last long-term, but that provides a really fabulous window for other interventions to come into play as well. Often a great time to feel like you can engage in therapy as well. And I think that's really important to remember. I did love, as I said this here, though, I mean, you've just talked about things that, you know, that have happened in the past. This is from the People's, page 28, the People's Home Library. Over 100 years ago in North America, people with mental health symptoms were told they were suffering from imperfect nutrition and that they should eat a better diet. So I often talk about how this is like the cutting edge research at the moment. Most of this research has occurred in the last 10 years, but actually there's a real ancient wisdom that comes from a lot of how we can view health these days as well. So I thought that was just quite nice to comment on. The other thing, because I know that watching live, most of us are here in New Zealand. I know we do have people that watch the recordings from different time zones, but for those of us, some of whom are in America, so very much applies for you as well. On page 32, when we're talking about the alliances between the pharmaceutical companies and direct-to-consumer advertising, New Zealand is the only country outside of America that allows direct-to-consumer marketing of pharmaceuticals. I don't think that's a good thing. That's definitely where I sit personally there. So we're the only ones that allow pharmaceutical things that only your doctor can prescribe to be advertised directly to us as consumers on TV, print advertising, whatever, so that we can then go, you see those ads, ask your doctor about. We are the only country outside of America that allows that type of advertising. And so that does drive, more movement towards pharmaceuticals as well. It is crazy, yeah, just comments coming through there. And also in the comments, teenage kids stories, scary hearing some of what their peers are going through. Absolutely. It's definitely getting to that age, and times where we're starting to have conversations with our kids now, oldest being almost 15, about how they can support their peers going through that. I mean, that's a huge thing to put on, but they're having they're being exposed. They are often the ones that are hearing about what their peers are going through and picking that up. They're often the frontline support people that are hearing this, and so knowing how they can take that somewhere else, because they're too young to deal with it themselves, but what to recognize. Can you imagine us having to think like that when we were teenagers? So it is scary, but also interesting. When I got to the end of this chapter, as I'm just conscious we've only got through one chapter, and looking at the time, but that near the end, page 38, all of us can reduce our risk of cardiovascular disease, change our diets, increase our exercise, enhance our social networks. You can do the exact same thing to look after the health of your brain. And so, getting sleep, minimizing stress, sometimes it's changing a job. I know that was something that was really important for my husband to have done when he was going through that. And we're talking about that in a Mental Health Awareness Week panel event this week. We're looking at just over that longer term depression. He's spoken often before about his acute mental distress, but looking at that role over that longer depression time, and when he was on and off medication and changed jobs, and different ways that workplaces deal with things as well. Completely different employer, hugely supportive of where he was at, probably recognised without him needing to open up, provided him with and funded, a psychologist. This was, before EAP was really a big thing in all businesses. And it's really driven what Craig has wanted to do in terms of providing EAP support to small businesses because of just the huge impact it had on him. So these are all modifiable risk factors. So we can't change our childhood experiences. We can't change the toxins we've already been exposed to. We can't change our genetics, but we can change our diet, our exercise, how connected we try and be, our connections, our spiritual connections, our dogs are good. These things are modifiable and they can have a big impact. And I think that that's really empowering. And the last sentence in this chapter and the takeaway is, after you read this book, the power to improve your mental health will be in your own hands, which I find really exciting. I'd love if you just share in the chat 1 or 2 words of how you feel about the impact that more knowledge in your hands around the role of nutrition and mental well-being would, how that makes you feel. If you get Roxy. Taking control, excited, empowered, empowering. Yeah. Knowledge is power. So many positive feelings that it has there. And I think even that knowledge is power can relate to the experience that you you're slightly daunting, more excited. Good. Yeah. I think some of that, when I relate that actually to your experience, Nina, that you've so kindly shared as well, in terms of actually having the knowledge of the benefit of the medication was also empowering for you. And so, you know, whatever the knowledge is, the more knowledge we have, the more we get to make choices, whatever those choices look like, is important. And comment here, it's an opportunity to do it right for our kids and help set them up with the knowledge we never had. Absolutely. When looking at how food fuels us, I've always thought about my weight and my physical health and not feeding my brain. That's a huge paradigm shift to make. And for those of us with children, a really important one to be aware of with our language as well, and for ourselves, noticing that in our own self-talk. I know for me, I often will decide what I'm having based on how I know I want to feel. And I used to think about, was it, you know, I've never counted calories, but, you know, what were the calories or what was going to be the impact on my physical appearance? But it's so much more empowering for me when I think, if I eat this, this is how I'm going to feel tomorrow. Is that how I want to feel when I show up for what I've got on my plate tomorrow? No, it's not. Very much easier to make the decision. And a big believer that that size and weight and health are not as inextricably linked as we were often led to believe. So that's a powerful message I'd like my children to grow up with. Can help prevent our kids following a similar path through shared genetics. So very conscious of time if people do need to leave, but I think that's probably just worth just touching on that one before we move into next week as well, is just that role of genetics, because it's talked about in here. Keeping your genes healthy. So it starts on sort of page 48. And this is one of my big areas. Personalised nutrition was my master's degree. And so that's the whole idea that there's not one right way of eating that suits everybody. And a lot of that is because of the interplay between our genes and our diet. So a whole field of science, nutrigenetics, nutrigenomics, in the way that that plays out. And so it was sort of an area that I love that they cover it in here as well. And they talk about inflammation through that chapter. That's chapter 2. And then in page 63, really honed in on the MTHFR gene, which, I guess probably sort of 5, 6, 7 years ago, this became a much more talked about gene. Lots of people have talk about it a lot. Lots of people have had their, children tested or themselves tested. And they talk in here, they says about down the bottom of page 63, with MTHFR, the research is incredibly variable. And for example, in Julia's research, she didn't find more of the MTHFR variants in kids with ADHD compared to the general population. And the presence or absence of the variant didn't predict the response to the nutrients. So this was the nutrients in their trials that they were doing. And I absolutely agree with that. So MTHFR is one of the genetic, that we can have differences in our genes. And it's kind of how I like to talk about them. And it's specifically a single nucleotide polymorphism, or SNPs, genetic SNPs, SNP for short. Where we can have differences. So in the genetic testing that I do with clients, it comes out as a traffic light system. Green light, you've got the most favorable version. Orange light, one of the two parts is favorable and one is less favorable. And the red light, you've got two less favorable. I would just say, when I was looking at this, I was thinking, but you can't just look at one genetic SNP, just like they're saying you can't look at one nutrient, because there's so many genes that are at play. And when you look at the total picture, you get more of that. In fact, if I share to the screen, when you're talking about MTHFR, this was just, I loved that, putting the little simplified tryptophan metabolisms thing in there. So this was one showing how tryptophan down the way to serotonin, all the way down to melatonin, and all the different nutrients on the side. And the same with phenylalanine down to dopamine and norepinephrine, and all the different nutrients that are required for those steps. So that just sort of followed through from that. But if we look at this one with the methylation cycle, which is discussed, MTHFR is this gene here. and all the rest are other different parts of this pathway. So in the gold is the nutrients that are required, and then there's all these other little bits in here. I don't think this was the picture I originally pulled up. So if I look at my genes, I have the least favorable options for or variations for MTHFR, for COMT, for CBS, for a few of these. And so through the whole pathway, I'm challenged genetically, which is another thing that helps me make decisions around what I need to eat, because I know that for me, both in terms of what I've personally experienced and because I've had the genetic testing done as well, to me that's reminds me that I may have a greater need to eat healthy and to have a great supply of nutrients than other people, because of understanding the full picture of the genetics. And so that's another really great reminder to do that. So I think there was a question so in the Facebook group around that, and that kind of just as, do we have differences because of our genetics? We absolutely do, or because of our family histories, and it's more than just one gene. It's looking at the full picture and needing to support all of the pathways in the same way that we need to look at all of the nutrients to support all those conversions of different amino acids, which are building blocks of protein, so the tryptophan or phenylalanine, down the pathways to make our serotonin and our GABA and our dopamine and our noradrenaline, etc. So I think that is important. And if we stopped at the end of chapter 2, the other thing I would just bring in there would be the importance of understanding drug-nutrient interactions. So a lot of every client that I work with, I assess their drug-nutrient interactions before I recommend any supplement, because and it's the same with these nutrients. So what we do know from working with the nutrients that have been studied by Julia and Bonnie is that often they can increase side effects to if you're taking any antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication, they can increase side effects, and it can be titrate up the nutrients and titrate down on the drugs and get to a point, but it needs to be very carefully managed and by a professional. Titrating down medication is outside my scope of practice as a nutritionist, so that's something that I always work alongside someone with. And so it's important that you don't self-supplement, and if you're taking any form of medication, it's really important that this gets done alongside professional support. That's really, really important. And also, I mean, they talk in the book, some part of when I do drug nutrient interactions, I'm also looking at the way that some medications deplete nutrients and if you require more of them, and statins, which is heart medication, cholesterol medication, and CoQ10 is a prime example of that, where we know taking statins depletes CoQ10, and so I generally would supplement any of my clients taking a statin with CoQ10 if that didn't interact with any of their other medications. But I do just urge, information is knowledge, but safety is key. So that's always needs to come first. What have we got here? Maybe hard to find a GP mental health person to guide this though. Really good question. I think most GPs, so anyone that I work with has to give their permission for me to contact their GP. If I do contact their GP, I typically always let them know that I'm doing that, unless it's an urgent red flag. Most are quite open if they know that someone on board is doing the part that they don't know and you're working together. So I've actually had a much more positive experience of that than I thought would be the case. There is one of the suppliers that brings the nutrients that are studied in the book into the country, does provide a service where they work very closely with you to titrate with their specialists. So that's another way of doing it if your GP isn't open. but they require a letter from your GP to confirm that they can support you through it, so that the GP is always aware, or the prescriber, which may not be a GP, of course. And yeah, so it is very different. And I think often there's a lot more open-minded GPs out there now than we think. And then there's always, the option of using someone else. So I've just started working alongside a functional medicine doctor in Auckland here. Dr. Kamal Karl has invited me to join his practice alongside him and his wife. So he is probably one of the first functional medicine doctors in New Zealand, looks very much along this line. And so that's the other option, is if your own GP isn't supportive and you're wanting to go down this route, then you could find another medical professional that's open to it, but always with the appropriate support there. So that's where, the knowledge is information. It's kind of like the direct to consumer, talk to your doctor ad, where same again, if you're not taking any medication, then these are much safer. If you are, then it just needs to be managed, and it's have a conversation and see where they're at, if it's something that you're looking at doing. And there will be more as we go into other chapters. So the next section next week delves much more into the diet. And one of the things that, although all of the research that Bonnie and Julia have done is using micronutrient supplements, they still recommend as the first starting point that diet is where you start. So diet is your starting point, and then if that's not enough, and it may be because you have a greater nutritional need than you're ever going to be able to get through your diet, or it could be because of some of the factors like chapter 3 around soil and the way that nutrients in our food are changing, then you can look at supplementation, and if that's not working. So it's just changing the order that we do things, and that dietary studies are notoriously hard to do. You can't really blind a dietary study. So this, using the nutrients, is a proof of concept, but that, and there is some very good dietary studies actually being done from Deakin University in Melbourne, where they do a lot of actually, diet studies as opposed to supplement studies that are showing incredible effects. They've got a Food Mood Institute there, headed up by Dr. Felice Jacker. And I've got her book as well. So it's another fabulous book to read with a slightly different viewpoint, because each researcher is very honed in on what they're dedicating their life to. So you get a nice broad perspective as well. But between the literature out there, it's just so encouraging that these diet studies are showing incredible support for people. The nutrient studies are showing some incredible support and outcomes for people. And it's just something I really want people to know about, that diet is part of a toolbox for supporting mental well-being. And not to be overlooked. And unless we're out here singing the praises of the diet and sharing the information and sharing the research, people don't know. So
sorry, Bronwyn, just to interrupt. You want to check with the diet topic, were you going to cover people that have got like IBS type of problems, lactose intolerant, gluten, that type of?
So a little bit in here, and then a little bit more in terms of, sometimes that can be a bit more specialized. But part of what drew me down this path of gut-brain axis to begin with was, what I noticed was that almost everyone that was coming to my clinic, no matter what they were coming for, there was an element of this gut-brain connection at play. And that was whether it was people that were coming, something like, before I was even specializing in this area, just as a general nutritionist, I would say probably 70% of my clients were taking an anti-anxiety or antidepressant medication. So that was quite pertinent, it really spoke to me of just how many people were struggling. But then I was noticing these, wow, so there's all these, people that have been to gastroenterologists and all sorts of issues with gut and digestive problems that aren't getting better. And so often the connection was to do with with supporting the brain health as well, looking at the role that stress plays in the gut, the role of the vagus nerve for transporting, transferring all this information, how anything that stimulates the vagus nerve, like humming and gargling and singing, and these things also support the way that the gut works. And that for that, looking into that, I really recommend looking at something like Nerva app. So Monash University developed, I believe, so they developed the FODMAP diet, which is very restrictive, and lots of people were coming to me having done a FODMAP diet. And when I was doing stool microbiome testing, I can tell you straight away who's been on a low FODMAP diet because of huge depletion in some of their keystone species that don't get fed when you're eliminating the high FODMAP foods. And now they're showing, so Nerva is an app that's been created on the back of some research showing that gut-directed hypnotherapy was as effective, if not more effective, as a low FODMAP diet for IBS. So a real validation again of this whole gut-brain axis connection and how much both ways this communication is traveling. So in these sessions, we'll probably stick more to anything that's covered within the book, but they're all huge passion areas and interest areas of mine as well, and definitely so much there that we could cover. We could just keep this as a weekly chat. So yeah, it is all very fascinating. Well, I'm conscious of your time, so I'm going to leave it there. The homework for next week, is to hopefully get a chance to read through part 2, which is chapters 4 through 7. So it's, what's that, pages 103. It's about 10 pages a day again. So hopefully that's manageable. But as I've said, we've got Dr. Julia Rucklidge joining us live next week. So Julia lives in Christchurch in New Zealand, and she's conducted loads of interesting research. But a particular note in relation to chapters 6 and 7 of the book, the role of nutrients in stress and trauma. And she has used participants affected by participants in the trial of people that were affected by the Christchurch earthquakes, and then later also in the mosque terror attacks. So that's some really, really fascinating research here. As I said, I'm a big Dr. Julia fangirl, and really excited that we've got her on. So if you've got anything in particular that you would like us to ask Julia, we should have time for Q&A next week, plus I will be putting some questions to her. So please let me know any questions. You can email me, Bronwyn at bronwynhudson.com. You can comment in the Facebook group, or whichever way that you would like to contact me. But I would love to be able to ask your questions to Julia. So yeah, have a flick through those. Tackling life's challenges with supplements, I think, was one of them. And then the next chapter is improving resilience to trauma and stress. And I think anything that we can do to improve resilience in our current world climate is, stress is going to, the triggers, even when this particular challenge is over, there will be another one, and there will be another one. All these challenges look different, but we're always faced with them. So anything we can be doing to support our resilience is beneficial. So have a read of that for next week, and I look forward to having you back. Is there any final questions or comments that people would like to make before we go?
I'll add. I just want to say thank you, Bronwyn. We've always been very focused on, eating healthy for more the physical benefits of eating healthy. And this kind of sparked this whole new wave in our household. So we're dusting off our old books and rereading a lot of the things. And as I'm reading through the book, I'm checking with Wayne and telling him what I'm reading. So it's just actually sparked this whole new wave of information in our household. So it's really been great. So thank you for hosting this.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's my privilege. It's great to have some people that will listen to me natter on about the things I'm passionate about, and to share your valuable inputs as well and your thoughts. And so thank you to everyone for giving up their time tonight to share it with me, and for those of you that have shared things in the chat and that have shared things on camera as well. I really appreciate that. Your input is what makes this relatable to everybody, because we've all got very different experiences. I'll just pop in here as well. Email Tanya is bronwyn@bronwynhudson.com. Oh, .com, that is, not .co at the end. But yes, please do email me anything that you would like me to ask Julia. I'll be putting questions to her in the next couple of days, and then we'll be bringing a Q&A part into the end of our talk as well. So excited that we've got Julia next week. I'll look forward to seeing you all then, and have a fabulous week, everybody. It is Mental Health Awareness Week, so take time to kōrero is the theme, which Cherie is so nicely showing us in her backdrop as well. It's a perfect time to reach out and connect. We've just talked about how connections are important. So reach out to people, reconnect with people, enjoy your week, and I will see you next Monday.